Hi friends, welcome to my channel. In previous video, I told you about the origin of Mycenaean civilization. Link to that program there is in the description of this video. Now I'm going to give you a brief history of this civilization and tell you about the very rapid rise of this civilization and its even more rapid collapse. In the 16th century BC, under the influence of Minoan Crete, a number of independent states emerged in Greece. The most important of them were Mycenae, Pylos, Athens, Thebes, Orchomenos, and Iolcus. All of them adopted from the Minoans their political system, writing, and many traditions. Since the Mycenaean states were established as a hub for international trade in Europe, all of their foreign and domestic policies were geared towards fulfilling this function. They formed a fleet and, with the support of Minoan Crete, became part of the maritime transportation system. However, they also engaged in piracy and worked as mercenaries in the armies of the eastern states. The Mycenaean states had complex relationships and often engaged in armed conflicts. Defensive walls surrounded almost every palace to protect the inhabitants from the outside world, especially from their neighbors. Greek myths often describe the violent conflicts between kings as they fought for power. For example, one myth recounts the story of 7 kings from Argos who waged a campaign against Thebes. Despite several failed attempts, they eventually succeeded in storming and destroying the city. Archaeologists later confirmed this myth, discovering that the palace in Thebes was burnt and destroyed in the 14th century BC, long before other palaces and citadels were destroyed. The Mycenaean states were initially dependent on Minoan Crete, but they soon emerged from its custody and began competing with it in maritime trade. This competition probably led to the conflict that resulted in the Greek occupation of Crete and the elimination of the Minoan civilization there in the 15th century BC. How this happened is unclear. One theory is that Minoan Crete's power was weakened by a volcanic eruption on the island of Thera. This eruption may have caused a massive tsunami on Crete, resulting in the destruction of all coastal structures and fleets. In the aftermath, the former vessels may have killed the weakened overlord. We don't know for sure whether this was the case or not, but according to archaeology, around 1450 BC, almost all the Cretan palaces were destroyed by fire and were never rebuilt. Such a one-time burning of the palaces could only happen in 2 cases, either as a result of a military attack from outside, or in the case of internal revolt. After these events, only the palace at Knossos survived, but there were also new inhabitants. At this time, the linear A script was replaced by the linear B script, adapted to the Greek language. It can be deduced that the power over Crete passed on the Greeks from the middle of the 15th century BC, and Greek became the administrative language of Crete. The Minoan civilization ceased to exist. Crete became Greek territory, and the Mycenaean states began to grow rapidly. Since then, all maritime trade was controlled by the Mycenaean rulers. During the 13th century BC, Greek settlements appeared throughout the eastern Mediterranean, from the Phoenician coast to the Gulf of Naples and the eastern coast of Sicily. The Mycenaean states, despite their historical tensions, were able to unite for joint military ventures when necessary. An example of such a venture was the famous Trojan War. During this war, the combined forces of the Mycenaean states, under the command of Agamemnon, captured and destroyed the city of Troy in Asia Minor. It took place at the turn of the 13th and 12th centuries BC. The Greeks have won, but after only a few decades, all the Mycenaean states suddenly ceased to exist. The collapse of the Mycenaean civilization is traditionally associated with the Dorians. It's generally believed that in the 12th century BC, they killed the Mycenaean rulers, destroyed the citadels, and thus eliminated the Mycenaean civilization. But who were these Dorians? There are two versions of their origins. One version suggests that they were invaders from the north and call their arrival the Dorian invasion. The other version suggests that the Dorians lived in Greece before and were either the lower class of Mycenaean society. To determine which version is more likely, we'll examine Greek mythology and archaeological evidence. Archaeological data show that in the middle of the 12th century BC, all of the Mycenaean citadels were captured and destroyed at almost the same time and were never rebuilt. Clay tablets found on the ashes of the Pylos Palace contain references to hasty preparations for defense due to an imminent attack. Additionally, a fresco in this palace depicts a battle between Mycenaean warriors and shaggy people dressed in animal skins. Mythology associates these events with the name of the legendary Heracles, who was apparently a real historical figure, one of the warlords of the Mycenaean kings. According to the myth, King Eurystheus persecuted the children of Heracles after his death. Fleeing from death, they found refuge in Athens. The king of Athens promised not to extradite the Heraclids and started a war with the invading army of Eurystheus. The Athenian army and the Heraclids won. They entered the Peloponnese, but were forced to retreat due to a plague. They made several attempts to conquer Peloponnese, but all of them failed. Only their great-grandsons were able to conquer it. This myth most likely describes real historical events, the conquest of Peloponnese by the Dorians and the collapse of the Mycenaean states. According to the myth, the Peloponnese was conquered by the descendants of Heracles, a native of Thebes. This suggests that there was no invasion from outside Greece, making the war purely an internal conflict. Also, archaeological studies don't indicate the presence of any foreign population in Greece during this period. After the destruction of the citadels, the same material culture persisted, albeit without writing and monumental construction. Therefore, of the two versions regarding the origin of the Dorians, whether they were tribes from the north or part of Mycenaean societies, the second appears to be more plausible. It's supported by the following facts. The captured and destroyed citadels were never rebuilt. If the conquerors captured them, they would have cleaned them up and used them to control the conquered country. However, despite their favorable location, the citadels were never restored. This suggests a taboo in the new society against their revival. The second fact is that the social structure of the lower levels of Mycenaean society didn't undergo any noticeable changes. The territorial community, demos, retained its importance, and the title of its elected heads, basileus, became equivalent of the title of ruler. The titles of the top levels of the social pyramid, such as Vanax, Lovagetas, and other important officials, since the destruction of the citadels, were no longer used. Therefore, most likely, there was no Dorian invasion. The citadels were destroyed by the Dorians, who had been living in the Peloponnese as a lower class and staged the first revolution in history. Most historians believe that the Dorians' victory marked Greece's transition to another social system. In this system, the demos became the basic unit of society, and elected leaders held the power. Consequently, the Dorians were the founding fathers of Greek democracy. Life in Greece after the victory of the Dorians will be the subject of an upcoming video. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss it. At this point, I wish to conclude this video. If it was interesting, leave comments, put likes and repost. Thank you for your attention. See you later. Goodbye.